You're about to go into battle, but you're not afraid because you've already been there in your mind thousands of times and you've seen victory. You've trained a long time for this, so take a deep breath and get ready for your decisive moment. The Samurai is a complex melee damage dealer that layers multiple mechanics together to create a moveset that requires constant care, attention, and foresight. While it can be difficult to learn and master, it's incredibly satisfying to slice and stab your enemies to bits while building up to your ultimate moves. Today, we're going to overview all the mechanics in the Samurai's kit. Let's get started. Just like with all the melee fighters in the game, the Samurai uses 1-2-3 combos as its primary form of damage. The weapon skills in your combos are packed with information, and we're going to start by breaking down one of the components within them. The Samurai's primary resource is called Sen, and that's generated through your combo enders. There are 3 different Sen, each paired with a different combo ender. You can collect one of each type of Sen, and Sen can be spent on an Iaijutsu weapon skill. The type of Sen you've accumulated does not affect the Iaijutsu weapon skill you can use, only the number of Sen matters. With 1 Sen, you can use Higanbana, a low damage weapon skill that applies a moderate damage over time effect that lasts for 60 seconds. For 2 Sen, you can use Tenka Goken, a moderate damage area attack, and for 3 Sen, you can use Midare Setsugeka, one of the highest damage single target attacks in the game. I'm sure you've already noticed this, but Iaijutsu weapon skills have a short casting time, so be careful about your positioning when you activate them. The next component of your combos is the Kenki resource, which is unlocked at level 52 through Kenki Mastery and enhanced farther at level 62 with Kenki Mastery 2. Every hit of your combos generates Kenki, but the combo enders Gecko and Kasha generate additional Kenki when landed from the rear and side respectively. This resource is spent on damage buffs, damaging abilities, and movement abilities. The most relevant Kenki ability to what we're talking about now is Hisatsu Kaiten. This ability increases the damage of your next weapon skill by 50%. Kaiten is meant to be used before using your Iaijutsu. One more thing to note about your basic combos, the weapon skills Jinpu and Shifu provide damage and attack speed buffs respectively and should always be maintained. Keeping these buffs active isn't difficult, but if you're not careful about the order you use your weapon skills in, they'll fall off. Okay, it's time to talk about the rest of the abilities that you can spend Kenki on, and for this part, you might need a calculator. For damage abilities, you have Hisatsu Shinten and Kyuten for single target and area damage respectively. Each of these abilities cost 25 Kenki and are unlocked at level 62 and 64. Neither of these abilities have cooldowns, so it's up to you to use them at the correct time. We'll talk more about that later. At level 70 and 72, you unlock more powerful versions of these Kenki spenders. Each costing 50 Kenki, Hisatsu Sine and Goren deal massive single target or area damage, but unlike their less expensive counterparts, they have a hefty 120-second shared cooldown. For these, you only worry about your Kenki resource as they're coming off cooldown. Before we start crunching numbers, there's one more Kenki ability to mention. Ikishoten is unlocked at level 68, and on activation it generates 50 Kenki. Ikishoten has a 60-second cooldown. Now it's time for some Kenki math. Unlocking all 3 Sen will net you 60 Kenki if you do everything correctly, which is enough for Kaiten for your Iaijutsu Midare Setsugeka, and a single use of Shinten. Doing this will leave you with 15 leftover Kenki. That leftover 15 is something to keep in mind while you're building up to Midare Setsugeka. Should you need to, you can spend 10 Kenki on a gap closer, Hisatsu Gyoten, or a back dash, Hisatsu Yaten. Yaten is great for getting you out of trouble, but it also functions like a combo starter. On activation, it grants you a buff called Enhanced NP, which increases the potency of your ranged attack NP from 100 to 320. NP also generates 10 Kenki. As tempting as it can be to style your way through battles using your movement abilities isn't always the best way to do things. Using NP interrupts combos, so if you do decide to backstep with Yaten, if you are in the middle of a combo, you don't want to follow up with NP. If you're paying close attention to the clips on screen, then you'll notice that I made a couple of mistakes. After backdashing with Hisatsu Yaten, I didn't follow up with NP even though I didn't have a combo started. I also didn't use Kaiten before using Midare Setsugeka, and that's a whole nother problem. But let's get back on track. Because of Yaten's low damage and Kenki cost, There are a lot of attacks that enemies do that are more efficient to just walk away from. The general rule I like to follow for these movement abilities is, if the boss's area attack is going to force me away for long enough that I'll have nothing to do while I'm away, and if NP doesn't interrupt my combos, it's time for style points. Another thing you can do with your Kenki to increase your damage output is use the ability Hisatsu Seigan. This ability costs 15 Kenki and delivers an attack with a potency of 220, which is more efficient than Hisatsu Shinten. The reason you won't always be spamming Seigan is because it can only be executed while under the effect of open eyes. The ability Third Eye, which is unlocked at level 6, grants you a buff for 3 seconds that reduces the damage taken from a single attack by 10%. If you're hit during this time, you'll gain a buff called Open Eyes. While that buff is active, you can use a small heal on yourself called Merciful Eyes, or you can use Seigan. This buff is consumed once you activate either of these abilities. Alright, we're getting close to the finish line. There's a few more actions we must talk about. Tsubame Gaishi is an ability that's unlocked at level 76 that allows you to repeat the previously executed Iaijutsu action. This ability has a 60-second cooldown and should always be used on Midare Setsugeka or Tenka Goken if you're in a group fight. Meditate, learned at level 60, is a channeled ability that generates Kenki and stacks of a buff called Meditation. You can hold up to 5 meditation stacks, and those stacks can be spent on the ability Shoha. Each stack you have increases the potency of Shoha up to a maximum of 500. Meditate and Shoha don't see much use in combat, but in most extreme primal and raid fights where bosses dramatically transition through their phases, you'll have time to meditate for extra Kenki and meditation stacks. Last but definitely not least, we have Mekkyo Shisui. This ability is learned at level 50 and is a vital component of your rotation. Mekkyo Shisui allows you to execute weapon skill combos without meeting combo prerequisites. This means you can use your combo enders to quickly generate Sen for Midare Setsugeka. And there we go, now you know how to play the Samurai, but not really. Just like with the Summoner, learning what all of your skills do isn't enough. You have to learn how to piece them together in combat, so let's look at a scenario. We just finished our opener and used the final hit of Mekkyo Shisui on Gecko. We've got 35 Kenki built up, and on our way to Midare Setsugeka, we're going to build 40 more. What that means is I have enough Kenki for 2 uses of Shinten and 1 use of Kaiten. What makes this situation interesting is I have enough Kenki to use Shinten 3 times, and it's very tempting to spam this ability because it looks and sounds awesome. But doing so would leave me without enough Kenki to use Kaiten for Midare Setsugeka. Moments like these are what define the Samurai's gameplay loop, so always keep an eye on your Kenki, your Sen, your buffs, and the Higanbana dot that you have ticking on the enemy, and eventually you'll get good at managing all of it at the same time. And there we go, now you actually know how to play the Samurai, but there's a good chance you're going to need a lot more practice. I can definitely say I need to spend more time on the training dummy because this job is complicated, but that's the whole point of watching an overview. You learn how all the stuff works, then you go practice. Before we close out completely, I want to give a shout out to my newest patrons. Gabriel, Alex, and Caliph, I appreciate you coming out of your pockets to provide some extra support to the channel. Thank you very much for the patronage. With that said, if you enjoyed this video and you'd like to support the channel more than you already do just by watching, liking, subscribing, and commenting, you can head over to patreon.com/iBluairJgR to become a patron. As always, the name of the game is Final Fantasy XIV, the name of the channel is iBluairJgR. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.